event, so you can watch it later and recount and rethink some of the things that will be discussed today, some of the comments that our speakers will make, as well as share the wealth of knowledge with others, of course. So we'll start in a minute. Hold on, let me see if I can identify. Yeah, lots of people there that I know. I don't want to name names, but it's awesome to see you all here. Excellent. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me unmute that person. There you go. All right, she's getting in. All righty, my name is Eli Saltzman. I am delighted to be here today. It's a beautiful day on College Park. We had some rain overnight, some flood warnings, but everything looks very nice and sunny now. We have a wonderful roster of speakers today, and it's a delight to welcome you for the first event of the season. It's a book launch. Not only it is the first event of the season here at the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies, but it is also, among others, co-edited by our very own Paul Sham and our ex-officio Ellie Friedman and others, of course. I will introduce them as we move along, but for the time being, welcome, welcome, welcome. Polarization and consensus building in Israel. The center cannot hold, and as Paul said a couple of minutes earlier, I think it is the most timely topic of the day, certainly today, following the debate in the Supreme Court of yesterday. But I think that some of the conversation, some of the themes will kind of accompany us, if you wish, for a long time now, and we will have a chance to read and redebate and rehash some of the comments made here. I see more people joining us in, so again, just a welcome to everybody. My name is Eli Saltzman. I'm the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies. I'm delighted to have you attending this event. More people, that is awesome. The first event of the season, the book launch of Polarization and Consensus Building in Israel. The Center Cannot Hold, co-edited by our very own Paul Sham, Ellie Friedman, and Michal Neubauer-Shani. Delighted, and some other contributors will speak today. We're going to try and keep it up. As I said, I'm going to give you a 3 minutes warning with this small card, and then I'm going to move to a 1 minute, and then I'm going to shut you down with a fierce strike of the pen and move forward. So first and foremost, let's start with an overview of the project and their own chapter. Let me introduce our two speakers. Ellie Friedman, who's both an editor and a contributor. As I said, he's the head of the communication division at the multidisciplinary Department of Social Sciences at Ashkelon Academic College in Israel. His interests include political discourse with an emphasis on conflict resolution and polarization processes. Cannot be better than that. Also, Michal Neubauer-Shani, who's also a co-editor and a contributor. She's a senior lecturer at the Department of Politics and Governance, and multidisciplinary Department of Social Sciences at Ashkelon Academic College. Her research focuses on public policy and state-religion relations. She's also addressing the issues of religious feminism and civics studies. My friend, go ahead. You have 12 minutes in total, starting now.
Thank you, Eli, very much for your kind introduction and for all your work organizing this event. It's very nice to see a nice turnout here. So we actually held a book launch in Hebrew in the early summer at Ashkelon Academic College, but it's really, I think, important and timely to hold an event in English over Zoom, particularly during these fateful times. I will say a few words to introduce the book in general, and then Michal and I, who is also one of the co-editors and also my partner on the chapter that we wrote together, we will present our chapter in a little bit of detail. So a little bit of background. A little under 3 years ago, my partners, Michal and Paul, and I decided to take the initiative of editing a collection of academic studies that would examine the issue of consensus building and polarization trends in Israel, as this issue was becoming more central to the future of the state. we presented a proposal to Routledge Academic Press, and we were very happy to receive a positive response to this proposal, and we're able to move forward with collecting studies and abstracts and going through the whole process. This edited volume examines various trends of social and political polarization and consensus forming in Israel from a multidisciplinary perspective. Allow me to just very briefly define these terms. We draw on John Rawls's concept of overlapping consensus, which points to the existence of a significant core of commitments common to the reasonable fragments of each of the main comprehensive doctrines in a community. According to Rawls, the presumed imperatives of public reason enable compromise among various community institutions through which all parties agree on permissible forms of competition. On the other hand, polarization, we draw on McCoy's definition, which he defines as the normal multiplicity of differences in a society increasingly aligning along a single dimension, and individuals increasingly perceive society in terms of us versus them. So these are the main terms of reference for this volume, and we had contributions from political scientists, historians, communication researchers, sociologists, economists, and educators who focus on specific topics that serve as exemplary cases of various trends of consensus and polarization. Contributing authors grapple with these trends along the lines of the various well-known cleavages in Israel, including ideological, religious, economic, national, and ethnic cleavages. As such, this volume is unique in the sense that it approaches consensus and polarization as phenomena that span various categories of cleavages rather than focusing on a specific divisive issue in society. The various contributions to this volume represent a continuum that demonstrates various tendencies of polarization and consensus building within Israeli society, starting from chapters that reflect processes of polarization, that is, disputes or cleavages that have deepened over time. On the other side of the spectrum, chapters that reflect trends of consensus or discuss various approaches towards consensus building. And in between these two poles, we have chapters that present ways in which the status quo regarding various disputes is maintained. That is, cleavages or conflicts that have neither been mitigated or polarized over time. This volume was written primarily during the previous government's tenure, whose raison d'etre was an attempt in a way to facilitate a new type of consensus that included elements of the right-wing, centrist, left-wing, and an Arab party through both a combination of non-decision on highly divisive issues, as well as an attempt to focus on practical socioeconomic issues. In the end, various pressures due to polarization on religion and state issues, as well as the status of the occupied territories, resulted in the government losing its Knesset majority and collapsing just after a year. While polarization and disintegration of social cohesion were certainly growing trends during this period, when working on this volume, we did not envision a situation in which the majority of cabinet ministers would threaten to not uphold a Supreme Court ruling, nor did we envision a situation in which leading public figures in Israel would appeal to President Biden to avoid meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu during his American visit. Nor did we envision a situation where the two-state solution would become a term not used to refer to a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but a plan of possible separation of Israel into a secular liberal state and a conservative religious state. While the studies in this book deal with different historical periods, they each provide a unique perspective into how we arrived at the situation that we are at today, while posing some unique and creative ideas for possible consensus building. Before going on to present our chapter, I just want to thank Professor Eli Saltzman, Professor Paul Sham, Avis Koyman, and the entire team at the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at University of Maryland for organizing this very well put together online book launch event. I would also like to thank my wonderful partners on this edited volume, my good friend, Dr. Michal Neubauer-Shani and Professor Paul Sham. You have both been excellent partners throughout the process who have contributed enormously to the success of this volume through innovative ideas and excellent management skills. I'd also like to thank all the contributors to the volume who each one made very unique and important contributions to the volume. I will just mention those who are speaking today, Professor Zaki Shalom, Dr. Anwar Majadna, and Professor Chaba Nicoleni. Thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you, last but not least, to our audience. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you're all busy, so we're very happy to have you. That's it for my introduction. I hope I didn't take too much of the time for the actual article to be presented. But now we're going to move on to discuss the chapter that we contributed to this volume, which looks at an examination of liberal conservative polarization in mediated discourse on civic studies in Israel. Michal is going to start by presenting the first half, and then it will come back to me. I'm just going to share the presentation. Oh, host has disabled screen sharing. Can I get that ability?
Yeah, just give me a second. Hold on. There you go, Ellie. Should be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. Okay, I'll start. So, hi, everyone. I would like to start with a quote from Haaretz newspaper that sums up the catch-22 around civic studies in Israel. It is impossible today to compose in Israel a consensual textbook for civic studies. Israel has for 20 years been undergoing a civil war. Now, this statement illustrates an interesting stance. Despite the increasing necessity to focus on civic studies as a means of bridging, deepening social cleavages, these very cleavages make the building of common civic studies curriculum impossible. Like other Western democracies, Israel has been undergoing a process of extensive polarization due to several processes and events that challenged its solidarity and consensus, some of which appear on this slide. This situation entailed rebuilding a common identity which embraces differing opinions and led to the adoption of an encompassing civic education curriculum all over the democratic world. It should be noted that in Israel, civic education is mostly anchored in the high school civic studies curriculum. Therefore, we refer to this mandatory separate subject while having in mind civic education. A central goal of civic education in democracies is fostering a common civic identity that prepares citizens to embrace disagreements about basic values and settle conflicts in legal, legitimate ways. Thereby, this common civic identity establishes social and political consensus despite increasing polarization. Under the assumption that this curriculum will have a significant impact on the younger generation's perceptions of the state's identity, both the content and the pedagogical framework for teaching civic studies have been in the midst of a fierce public debate. In this context, the liberal and the conservative camps are mainly divided over the meaning of the two elements, Jewish and democratic. This deep controversy brought about a public storm around numerous revisions and removals of textbooks and addition and revisions of a term indicator, which became an informal substitute for the civics textbook. Additionally, there have been high-profile and contentious personnel replacement at the Ministry of Education. On a topical note, let me mention the relevance of civic studies to the current struggle in Israel, which touches upon the very meaning of democracy. the liberal camp protests the decisive role of the civics textbook in preparing the ground for the judicial overhaul, a book which was approved during a right-wing minister's office. As the curriculum of civic studies in Israel changes according to the minister's ideological camp agenda, any given curriculum is in deep dispute, alienating the opposing camp's members. They protest the curriculum through media engagement, specifically non-news articles, accusing the dominant approach of irreversible severe harm to the educational process and of polarizing the society. This kind of rhetoric brings about a similar reaction on the part of the opposing camp, which in turn resonates the controversy through the public sphere, thereby polarizing the society.
I'm going to take over now. Thank you, Michal. So as media potentially serve as a public sphere in which citizens engage in critical, rational debate to advance the needs of society with the aim of reaching consensus, this according to Jürgen Habermas, this study examines the extent to which the media debate reflects the central perspectives regarding civic studies curriculum based on Israel's various social cleavages. To this end, we examine non-news articles, that is, op-eds, editorials, analysis articles, and expose interviews with experts, in order to characterize the nature of the public debate with respect to civic studies. We attempt to identify the central themes associated with the issue of civic studies and illustrate how the liberal and conservative camps utilize the theme to advance their viewpoint. Furthermore, the debate regarding the content and pedagogical framework of civic studies has become yet another tool for aggravating polarization and othering of the opposing side of the debate while bringing this polarization into the classroom. Therefore, our second research purpose is to disclose the central discursive resources used by both liberal and conservative camps in order to appropriate central societal values towards their position on civic studies. We found three major themes that illustrate the differences between the liberal and conservative camps. The first theme being democracy as a worldview versus democracy as a form of government. The liberal worldview takes a substantive approach to democracy, viewing it not just as a system of government and free elections, but as a worldview that includes a system of values and principles, emphasizing that human rights are included within the concept of rule of law. Following this concept of democracy, civic studies, in addition to educating students regarding the system of government, must inculcate a system of democratic values emphasizing human rights. Conversely, the conservative approach takes what's known as a procedural approach to democracy, viewing it as a system of government in which competitive elections are held regularly. As such, civic studies should be limited to teaching facts about the Israeli system of government. And you can see a couple of quotes, media quotes that reflect each of these positions. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with these arguments that are being taken as well today with the judicial issue in Israel. The second theme is universal values versus particular national values and narrative. The media debate that we analyzed illustrates that both camps, in fact, advocate for teaching values, albeit the conservative camp assigns those values a secondary level of importance. The liberal camp argues that civic studies should focus on the perceived universal value of human rights, while representatives of the conservative camp advance teaching the particular values of the ethno-national majority, that is, the hegemonic values of Zionism. And you can see a couple of quotes that support each of these positions as well. Sorry, Eli, I didn't see that. Time's up. Oh, wow. Okay. Can I at least say concluding remarks, or is that it?
Go for it. Go for it. I'm pretty lenient today. It's a good day for you guys.
Okay. So I'll just skip forward. So regarding the public debate in the civic studies curriculum, we found that each side of the debate actually attempts to align itself with supposed neutral civic education by appropriating supposedly non-ideological societal values to advance its approach within the curriculum. And this results in this kind of aggravation of polarization, where each side is trying to take a topic which is meant to create civil consensus, and weaponizing it as a way to sort of delegitimize the other side. Just one last point is that we want to give a very short proposition that is based on this problem of the facts versus values controversy. We would say, and would sort of combat the polarization of the issue. There are differing opinions whether a core matriculation subject should be limited to teaching of facts, adopting this kind of procedural approach, or whether they should teach values. And we would suggest the following approach. Whereas civics would be the civics topic, which is for matriculation, would be limited to teaching this kind of facts and procedures, namely institutions and processes that characterize the regime, which would allow students to study facts for their matriculation and be tested on these issues. A secondary subject, there would be this kind of split of civic studies. A secondary subject would be entitled Central Debates in Israeli Society. And this topic would not be for a matriculation exam, but would give students this ability to kind of debate these central value struggles in Israeli society. And the second subject would allow students to develop autonomous critical thinking skills while preparing citizens to embrace disagreements about the basic values. As such, students would have a venue to engage in critical thinking, but not have to deal with this issue of being tested on value systems and being able to focus on facts for their matriculation exam. I'm sorry I went over time by a little bit. Thank you for being liberal on that issue, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah, I was tempted to say that I'm a bit illiberal today. Thank you so much. Hold on. There you go. All righty. Thank you so much, Michal. Thank you so much, Eli. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Zaki Shalom. Zaki will talk about the current polarization trends in the IDF and the Israeli military, although his book actually, contribution to this volume actually addresses Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to the two-state solution, and it is entitled The Controversy Surrounding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Position Regarding the Two-State Solution, Background and Implications. And just to introduce Zaki a bit further, Zaki Shalom is a member of the research staff at Ashkelon Academic College and the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. He has published extensively on various facets of Israel's defense policy, the role of the superpowers in the Middle East, Israel's struggle against Islamic terrorism, and Israel's nuclear option. Zaki, the floor is yours, my friend. As I said, I'm getting as illiberal as one can be at this point. So you have 17 minutes. I'll give you the cards if necessary. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your warm introduction. 3 days before the Declaration of Independence, which is often mentioned these days in Israel, Ben-Gurion summoned some of the ministers and the chief of staff at that time, Yigael Yadin, for a critical decision on whether Israel should or should not declare independence. There were considerations for both position, the fear of the Holocaust that was just closed, the opposition of the United States, the fear that the army is not really prepared for such a challenge. And he asked the chief of staff, Yigael Yadin, to present his case. And the chief of staff said, look, the chances are 50-50. I cannot guarantee that we are going to win this war. And if you ask me what is my position, I will tell you that I would recommend to postpone the Declaration of Independence. Ben-Gurion said, actually, look, I listen to you, I respect your view, but I have different viewpoint, and I'm here just a corporal in the British Army, and you're a general, but here in this case, you are subordinate to me. And he went on his way, and As you know, he made the declaration. He took very, very high risk on this decision. But obviously, this is his position as the first prime minister and defense minister of the state of Israel. 50 years ago, very close to now, 6th of October 1973, Yom Kippur War, there was a similar case in which the chief of staff, David Elazar, came to Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan and demanded very harshly that Israel would carry out a preemptive strike on Egypt and Syria. And he elaborated what could be the advantages. We could actually destroy both air forces, and we can get a lot of advantage of that. Golda Meir listened to him, and again she said, "I've never been in the army. I don't know what are the real advantages or not. I know that I'm responsible, and I'm taking a look at the bigger picture. We have to secure the support of the United States. We don't know how the war would develop. And here I'm telling you, okay, I heard you again, but I decide not to carry out this preemptive strike. Whether she was right or not, we don't know. But the issue is here that in a normal state, the civilian politicians are those who make the decision. Whether they are wrong, the public will judge if they are wrong or not. Years afterwards, when Anwar Sadat came to Israel, Menachem Begin was in a position, he was in the leadership, and again the chief of staff was Mota Gur, and Menachem Begin didn't think it's suitable to inform the chief of staff on what's going on. The chief of staff didn't know about the coming of Anwar Sadat. He was very angry. He almost resigned from office, and only kind of an accident in Tel Aviv postponed his resignation from office. What I'm saying is that, and you know it from your own history, the issue between Harry Truman and Douglas MacArthur when he fired him because of his statement, which Harry Truman thought they were political. In a normal state, normal democratic state, the one who takes responsibility are the politician, and the army has to fulfill the decision of the civilian leadership. We are in a normal situation now. Not now. It's years in which the balance of power between the civilian leadership in Israel and the army has changed very badly, in my view. And one of our professors wrote a book whose title was "We are not a state who has an army, we're an army who has a state." He just passed away a few months ago. And this situation is very, very bad, in my view, and it has to come to a change. But I don't see any forces that would change it. Why it happened? There are many factors, I think, that contributed to that. The declining prestige of the politician in Israel, I think, not only in Israel, but in other places, young people and talented people really don't want to go to politics. Politics is in Israel and in the United States, also in other states, is kind of involved with the corruption and people who want to really to make a good life go to high tech, to industry, to industry or economics, and so on, and those who unfortunately go to the politics are rather less capable. So the prestige of the politician in Israel has really degraded. It's the outcome of this is that two groups in Israel get into this vacuum and earned a very high, very powerful position in Israel. One is the army, the other one is the judicial bodies in Israel. Both of them get a lot of power, and we are now in a kind of an attempt to change, to restructure the balance of power between these bodies, and nobody really knows how this is going to end. The army in Israel is, today at least, is homogeneous more than ever before. In all the stuff that we know, there were debate inside the chief of staff, inside the general staff, between the generals. We know the big debate between Arik Sharon and Chaim Bar-Lev on how to defend the canal position during the war of attrition. There were other debates on budget, on how to build. Today, you don't hear of any disagreement. I mean, it's like, you know, something that resembles somehow the Politburo. Maybe, I don't know. It's very to me. I would like to see not a real, you know, not a real disagreement or a sharp controversy, but I would like to know that the generals don't speak in one voice. We want a general staff that is composed of people who disagree and make their view to a certain degree known to the politician. This doesn't happen in Israel, and I think it's not a good thing. Also, we have this phenomenon in Israel that generals are considered to be potentially good leaders. The minute they leave the army, they join parties, and they become head of parties, and so on. Nobody really made a really good research if they have been ever successful. To what extent they've been successful, as not every good soldier, not every brave soldier is also a good politician or a good manager of factories and so on. So are totally different things. But unfortunately, still the public give a lot of trust in the generals of the army in Israel, and in my view, this should be challenged by research that you are making, we are making in Israel, to see if it's really a good idea. Now, I think the army is I don't want to say responsible, but I think that the army has an ability to contribute a lot to the decline of two issues that are polarized in Israel. One is the issue of the balance of power between so-called Ashkenazi and Sephardi in Israel, between periphery and the center of Israel. The army is very much responsible for that, because the Israeli youngsters that are being recruited to highly prestigious units in the intelligence and in the Air Force are coming from Tel Aviv, Ramat Sharon, Herzliya, and Ra'anana. Everybody knows it. And the guy who is settled in Dimona, even Be'er Sheva or Kiryat Shmona, his chances to get into this unit is very, very low. I know that now a real effort is being made by the army to change this, but you know, bureaucracy acts like a bureaucracy, and to change a bureaucracy, you can go through the sea, through the Red Sea. It's easier than to change the way bureaucratic organizations are operating now for 20, 30 years. It's very, very hard, but it's make a problem because there is a kind of thinking in Israel that there is a kind of not symmetrical attitude to those who are joining the army in the infantry or in the armor, and those who join the more prestigious and those who go to the infantry and those who go to the armor are actually risking their life much more than others, and they get much less public prestige. And it's kind of something that is, in my view, very, very potentially very dangerous to the stability of the stability and the safeness of the Israeli society. And as I said before, it's the duty of the army to undertake every measure it can in order to change this thing, because this thing might really lead to kind of very dangerous polarization in the Israeli society. The other issue, which I'm sure everybody here is well aware, is what we call the Giyus Haredi. That means the recruit to the army of Orthodox Jews. There's been a very harsh debate on that in Israel, and the army, army is the key, has a key position to solve this problem, in my view, for a couple of reasons, which I'm going to mention. In the first place, you know that in any case in Israel, not without taking into consideration, okay, I got it. Almost 50% of the Israeli youngsters don't go to the army. So we don't really have an army that is army of Tzva'am, an army of the people. Many, in any case, do not go. I believe the days of big wars are over in Israel. We're not going to have another Yom Kippur war. And in any case, the new technology is really making it less and less necessary to recruit so many Israeli soldiers. We can rely on technology, and we don't need it. The army doesn't say that it doesn't want it, and he keeps this issue as something that is burning inside in Israel. And if I can just give him a call from here, and I think it's time for the army, first of all, to decide to go on, and not mandatory army, but rather professional voluntary army. It is much better for the new type of arms, new type of missile, new type of technology, high-tech cyber, things like that. It's much more suitable to the new generation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Zaki, and a couple of minutes ahead of time, actually. So this is a win for us, as well as we try to keep time. The next speaker is Anwar Mahajne. Let me introduce her. Anwar Mahajne is assistant professor at Stonehill College and a political scientist specializing in international relations and comparative politics, with a focus on gender, religion, and Middle Eastern politics. Her research focuses on how Islamic beliefs and institutions in the Middle East structure Muslim women's political understandings, agencies, and opportunities. Her book chapter that she contributed to this volume is entitled Polarization, Integration, and Moderation, The Case of Ram. Anwar, there you go. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if you could give me permission to share my screen. because I don't have that. We can.
Should be fine now, my friend. Go ahead. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to finally meet other contributors. I actually didn't know what the chapters entail in this book until I received the final edited volume. So it's good to hear what was published from the people who wrote it. My name is Anwar Mahajne. I am originally from Al-Fahim, which is a town, an Arab/Palestinian town inside of Israel. I do have interest in Islamist movements, so the chapter that I wrote was also influenced by my research on the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm looking at regional factors as well that I tried to apply to studying Ram and understanding the reasons why they joined the government coalition.
Anwar, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. If you can enlarge the screen, if you can kind of.
Is it not? Oh, like
the presentation. Yeah, that'll be easier for us to. Very good. Thank you so much.
There we go. So the chapter was attempting to answer the question, what resulted in Ram eventually deciding to join the government? You know, as a lot of you know, in June 2021, Mansour Abbas's Ram's Mansour Abbas.
I'm going to interrupt you once again on one of my apologies, but we can't see anything. So I think you're using a MacBook or something, perhaps?
Yes.
Yes, which is usually causing all kinds of problems on Zoom. So unfortunately, you have to downsize the screen or try it again one last time. Let's give it another go. I'm not an Apple person, and this is why. There you go. Perfect.
I think it's because I like minimize it and enlarged it. So, all right, let me go back to this. The chapter attempted to understand the factors that led to Ram finally deciding to join the Israeli government coalition in June of 2021. So I tried to break it down to a few factors: regional, state factors, and community factors. Regional factors are things that apply to all religious movements, Islamist movement in the Middle East in general. State factors that are very unique to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And of course, we can discuss all of that more in depth with all the changes that are happening and proposed. And then there are community factors that look at local as well as kind of ideological dynamics in the parties as well as the community. So to situate the theory, there are a few types of theories that have been applied to study Islamic movements in the Middle East in general, and some of it has been applied to Ram. One of them is the inclusion moderation theory. This theory is really popular. Julian Schwidler is very known for developing this theory alongside others. So what this theory does, what this theory says is that when you include Islamists in democratic process, in kind of the political process, elections, allowing them political participation, then they eventually become moderates. And the reasons or the reasoning of this theory behind this is that these parties are forced in the democratic process, or in cases it's just elections, I wouldn't call it full democracies, to first of all reach across the line to form coalitions. So that means that they will have to reach out to seculars, leftists, however you want to define it. And again, this depends on the context and the country. And that reaching out in itself results in moderation. There's also the fact that even though they embrace, let's say, gender supportive attitudes, maybe narrowly defined in terms of political representation, this will eventually lead them to manufacture consensus among their constituents to accept, for instance, women running for office. Lots of work has been done on the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Jordan. We have seen research that is happening on Turkey. So I wanted to examine the inclusion moderation theory in terms of Ram being included in the democratic process in Israel. Then there's the repression moderation theory, which Shadi Hamid developed it, and it's a controversial one because it says that when you repress Islamist parties, then that's when they actually are forced to moderate. So some people argue that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, the reason why they eventually ran for election, decided to join the elections, was because the political opportunity structure for them was closed for the longest time due to repression from various presidents. Under Sadat, there was an opening and closing, Mubarak, etc., and that pushed them to moderate until they kind of participated in the election and won elections. I don't know why this was deleted, but what I wanted to say that in the case of Ram, we'll see that there's multiple dynamics that are at play, and it's not one or the other. And I'll explain that a little bit. One of them is that for Ram, for instance, unlike the Muslim Brotherhood, there's no case that they will run for election and establish an Islamic state, right? In that case, it's virtually impossible unless like something drastic happens. So that's different than, for instance, when the Muslim Brotherhood ran for office or participated in politics and eventually were elected after the Arab Spring. So in order to also understand Ram joining the coalition, we need to know that historically there was a split in Ram itself, or before Ram became a political party, in the Islamic movement itself. Now we have the southern branch of the Islamic movement, which Ram represents the political branch of it. And then we have the northern branch of the Islamic movement that Israel banned in 2015. The northern branch is based in al-Fahim, or was formed in al-Fahim where I grew up. It's totally has a different approach than the southern branch, and all of it came to the point of deciding to join the Israeli elections or not to join. And that happened around 1996. So initially it was one Islamic movement, Sheikh Abdullah Nimr Darwish, Ra'id Salah, who's from al-Fahim, Kemal Khatib, all of them established that or founded the Islamic movement in Israel in the 1970s. That was after the 1967 war, the West Bank and Gaza, and the opening to the other Palestinian community in that region. Some of them got education in the West Bank, and that also was around the time that we saw the Iranian Revolution, 1979, and all the implication of that regionally that promoted this sense that actually Islamists might be able to win and that religion is the only solution. And the reason why lots of Muslim countries and Arab countries lost the war, but was because of this distance from religion. And also it discredited a lot of secular leaders. Then we saw Hezbollah emerging in the early 80s, and we saw how it was considered as forceful against Israel. So that kind of pushed or put an emphasis on Islamist movement and gave them momentum. So in other than, are you going to tell me 5 minutes before I'm supposed to be done? Oh, 3, whoa. All right. Then moving away from the regional influence, we see them having growing influence at the local level that participate in municipal elections. However, when it came to participating in the government, we see the split. The northern branch did not want to join the elections because they don't want to credit Israel as a true democratic system, while the southern branch saw that the elections is the only way to achieve some progress and achieve some of their demands. Now, after that tension, we have to talk about the different ideological streams in Arab parties. So we have 4 streams that Asad Ghanem kind of talked about. There's the Arab-Israeli stream. For instance, if you think of any Arab member who runs as a member of a Zionist Jewish party. So what's her name? Ibtisam Marani could be an example of that. And then we have the communist stream, so that's Khadash, and then we have the nationalist stream, that Balad, and then we have Ra'am, which is more of a religious stream, which according to Mansour Abbas, on social issues, they're closer to right-wing Israelis than they are to other leftist Arab parties who supported LGBTQI rights. And we know that there was part of the split that happened in the joint list due to support for LGBTQI rights from members of Khadash. So it's important to pay attention to also the social dynamics, when it comes to women's issues versus LGBTQI issues, where Ra'am actually has a woman representative, but when it comes to LGBTQI issues, there's no room for maneuver when it comes to that. So that comes to that, and also to think about how these parties are competing for a small pool of electorates. And the joint list kind of created an environment in 2015 to join all these forces together. But because of the extreme ideological differences between them, that split caused, and we saw how Balad wasn't able to achieve that threshold that was raised in 2015 and resulted in the joint list formation to 3.25. But kind of all these dynamics influenced the decision for Ram to join. And honestly, there are indications that this change is not just temporary, it's permanent, and it's going to be implemented ideologically in the movement and the way the party is going to run.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And doing this on time. Hold on, let me do something here for a second. Thank you so much, Anwar. Our next speaker is my colleague, who's literally upstairs, just one floor up, Professor Paul Sham. And I think that, you know, as we talked about how to structure this event, we actually decided that it's going to be more of a conversation rather than a presentation like the other folks. So I don't see Paul. Paul, where are you?
Oh, I'm right
there
here
you go.
on my screen next to you.
Absolutely. And again, I can always walk upstairs. So Paul, so my first question to you is, what is the main argument? How is this new? What is the new thing that now we know after reading your book chapter?
Well, first of course, I'd like to thank Ellie and Michal for inviting me to this project and their extraordinary foresight in perceiving that now, 3 years later, polarization would engulf Israel. So I think that extraordinary. As a historian, I look at the past, they must look at the future. So my chapter goes back to the 1980s and argues that the split in Israel that we see now and for the last few years, this really extraordinary culture war really had its roots in the 1980s. In the Lebanon war, the first war that was protested by many Israeli Jews, the Mizrahi Ashkenazi Gulf that had been there, but really became wide, partly with the formation of Shas, and also the Mizrahi presence in Begin's Likud party, and also the Haredi growth into a decider between Likud and Lever, and they're flexing their muscles. This was a new generation that went past the founders of the state, and we see all of these resonating in today's issues. You're muted now.
My apologies, sorry. So my question to you after reading this chapter is whether this is something new or whether this is something that was accompanying, so to speak, the creation of the state from 1948, or perhaps even before that, this disagreement, fundamental disagreement about some of the basic elements. And you list a number of variables, and me being a political scientist, I like parsimony. I like as few variables as possible. So can you identify perhaps what is the kind of the focal point, the most fundamental, the basic element that kind of drives this divide and kind of explodes in the 1980s?
I would say the most fundamental is what is the Jewish nature of the Jewish state. And for the founders of the state, almost all of them, it's a Jewish style. It's having the day of rest or recreation on a Saturday, not a Sunday, that they were all secular and thought religion was something modern people left behind. Israel is not unique by any means, especially in the Middle East, as having a resurgence of religion. But one thing the founders did not realize, they thought the state would be filled with people like them from Russia. Then there was the Holocaust, and who was left? The so-called Mizrahim, who are undoubtedly Jewish, but had a very different idea of how Jewish life had to be lived. They also, of course, badly underestimated the power or the growth of the Haredi population. There were a few thousand. Let them go to yeshiva instead of the army. Well, there they grew for obvious reason. So I would say this would be the most fundamental of the split that really became more visible in the 80s.
Excellent. And so my follow-up question is, Begin is considered by many as a populist leader, right? He's trying to kind of take advantage of this strife between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, between the kibbutzim and the development towns, the pools, the famous quote about the pools and the kibbutzim that they were close to the others. So my question is, what is the connection between political necessity and this kind of polarization? Is it a ploy that is employed, manipulated, if you wish, by politicians who want to get elected and hence, as a result, have this interest to enhance and to increase the gap between the different parts of Israeli society that creates this polarization?
Of course, that's part of the political game everywhere. But I think this split was genuine or is genuine and touches people's lives in a fundamental way. And I think it's very unfortunate that the two most charismatic politicians in Israel today are Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Obviously, it's not because I like them, but I think they both use and represent their portion of the population, and their power is made possible by, I would say, the weakness of Bibi Netanyahu, who leads a party twice as large as all of the religious Zionists, but can't muster the political and personal will to make things go in a way that is more for the moderate right than the extreme religious right. So, yes, I think the feelings are real. They're not made up.
Okay, so you looked at the history. You're a historian. I'm a political scientist, as I just said. So, but let's switch the roles, and you be a political scientist and tell me. So, what is the trajectory to the future? So, where are we heading? And more specifically, assume that Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer in the political game. Will we see the same degree of polarization? Will it be exactly the same?
My predictions, and historians always should avoid them, so I'm on thin ice, is that within a year, the coalition will collapse, either because it won't be producing what the members want, either Haredim or religious Zionists, or what we've had to take seriously in the last week or so, this crazy idea of President Biden to actually pursue Saudi-Israeli peace, which is, well, it's a whole subject, but that might well or almost certainly would upset the coalition, assuming that the U.S. insisted on some rights or provisions for the Palestinians that I don't think the religious Zionists could accept. So I would predict within 2 years or so, a mainstream center-right government from Lapid through a new leadership of Likud.
Excellent. Not only that I converted you to political science, but also we made it in time and kept the limits. Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate you very much.
Okay,
our next speaker.
Thanks for your questions.
Absolutely. The next speaker is Saba Nikoleni. Sorry, I'm butchering that name. My apologies, Saba. Is a professor of political science and director of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies at Concordia University. His research focuses on the comparative study of political parties, electoral systems, and legislators in post-communist democracies, as well as on the political systems of Israel and India. Saba, let me see. I don't see you on my screen, but you are here somewhere. There you go. And now I see you. Go ahead, my friend.
Can you hear me, Eli? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So I would like to start by saying that I'm very grateful to Eli, Michal, and Paul for inviting me to offer a contribution to this volume. I would like to thank them for their incredible leadership, drive to bring this multi-author edited volume together, and for their never-ending patience, which I needed and I often abused. So Michal, Eli, and Paul, thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be here with you together on the screen. My interest, as Eli explained, is in comparative politics. When I'm looking at issues that puzzle Israeli society, that challenge Israeli society, I'm almost invariably driven to asking questions about whether there are institutional solutions, if so, of what kind, and whether institutional solutions to these problems that are offered necessarily work in the way they are intended, and if they do not, then what are the reasons for such failure, and in general, what are the opportunities for institutional learning and experimentation that we can provide. And certainly the period that we have been addressing, this current period of Israeli society, offers a lot of food for thought for anyone interested in institutional design and institutional experimentation. We all remember that the general election to the Knesset of April 2019, while it started out as yet another quite conventional Israeli election, all of a sudden broke down. The process of forming a government broke down when Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Lieberman failed to conclude an important agreement to bring about the formation of yet another right religious coalition government. And there started a seemingly cascading process of yet another round of elections, leading to yet another failed series of attempted government formations, until we had a remarkable moment when the two leaders of the two camps that defined the main political blocs throughout this period, Mr. Netanyahu on the right and Mr. Benny Gantz leading the blue and white coalition on the left, or center left, if you will. The ideological labels are very tricky in this context. Agreed to form and try a grand coalition, national unity, national emergency government in May of 2020, which was the 35th government of the State of Israel. Now, at the time, I don't know how many of us were as enthusiastic as I was, but I certainly was extremely thrilled and happy to see the incredibly sophisticated institutional design that emerged from the agreement between Netanyahu and Gantz, of course, encouraged by the State of Israel. And eventually getting some measure of public support. Now, as we know, half a year later, that coalition was no more. And while journalistic and other more popular anecdotal descriptions attributed the cause to Netanyahu, who cannot be trusted, what I'm trying to do in this chapter is trying to offer maybe a little bit more sophisticated, or at least a little bit more scholarly attempt or solution as to why this attempt at a national unity grand coalition government broke down. I do want to mention briefly that looking at this government as a national unity coalition, a grand coalition government, in and of itself is fascinating, because when you look at the history of similar governments in Israel, you see that they normally emerged out of one of two kinds of contexts. One of them was a genuine national emergency, whether you think of 1967, when really a military threat necessitates the coming together of yesterday's political foes, or a political deadlock, which, and of course, the paradigmatic case for that is the famous coalition government by the Alignment and Likud, the former led by Shimon Peres, the latter led by Yitzhak Shamir, first in 1984, 4 years later renewed in 1988. Now, that the Gantz-Netanyahu coalition government is interesting because it actually emerges out of a combination of both types of contexts. And this is a point that I'm making, trying to make forcefully, if you will, in the paper. There were elements of national emergency thanks to the corona pandemic, and of course the political deadlock also that I had already mentioned. So what the paper then tries to do, and I won't of course go over the details of the argument, I will just tease out the main point in a moment, is try to understand where and why the 35th government, i.e. the Likud blue and white led coalition government, failed, where the Alignment Likud government of 1984 succeeded. And so what are, if I may paraphrase Eli's question in a parsimonious sense, what are the critical differences between these two national unity governments that might help us get an analytical handle on why one succeeded as the other? Now, there are some very important similarities between the two that I want to mention. Both of them were, of course, surplus majority governments. This is an important point. That compels me to say that while it's tempting to call the Bennett-Lapid government also a national unity grand coalition government, it was not. It was a minimum winning coalition government. It had absolutely no resemblance to what we call grand coalitions in the comparative literature. The Gantz-Netanyahu coalition, however, was that. Now, however, beyond this similarity, most of the other similarities fast disappear. So when you look at the coalitional status of these two surplus majorities, it is true that the Shamir Peres government was a genuine grand coalition where the two main protagonists in the political battle came together. That actually wasn't the case in the when it comes to the Gantz-Netanyahu agreement. While Likud and Blue and White did succeed the pact, it's important to note that Blue and White itself was already a very truncated entity when it entered the coalition. And the bone really, that the more significant electoral force of the Blue and White alliance that made that remarkable rise to electoral fame possible, and that was of course Yesh Atid, actually had no truck, no place, and Yair Lapid already steadfastly resolved not to be part of such an agreement. So yes, one of the leaders of one of the half protagonists was included in the Grand Coalition, the other was not. And that was important because that meant, that led us to another very important, crucial difference between the two governments. And that has to do the absence or presence of public legitimation. When you look at the history of the Peres-Shamir government, how it came about, you'll notice that not only did the two leaders actually start talking up the possibility of governing together already in the election. Shimon Peres repeatedly refused to comment against it, while Yitzhak Shamir repeatedly emphasized it as a possibility. Moreover, the president of the state at the time, Chaim Herzog the elder, if you will, several times indicated his own preference for such an outcome already during the election, as if preparing the Israeli public that these two foes might actually be seen together, shaking hands and overcoming their deeply seated ideological and political differences. There was no such thing, of course, when it comes to the formation of the Netanyahu-Gantz coalition. And the last step of that was, of course, Yair Lapid's desertion and exit from the game, together with, and that was, of course, not the only party that blew up in the process. And let me just mention one other crucial difference then between the two governments that I argue also helps us explain why the former succeeded and the latter did not. And this is, of course, written into the actual institutional formula by which the agreement of the government was sealed, and that's the coalition agreement. Seemingly, both of these governments had rather similarly looking coalition agreements, emphasizing a parity-based allocation of government for portfolios amongst the constituent parties, A, B, a rotating prime ministership. Now, on the one hand, when you look at the Shamir Peres government, that agreement actually reflected very, very nicely a very even division of political support between the two blocs. But that was not the case when you look at the Netanyahu-Gantz agreement. While the coalition agreement emphasized equality and parity, the underlying strength of the two parties was extremely different. So it really was a grand coalition of very asymmetric foes. Because of the split in the Blue and White, Benny Gantz was able, of course, to use his blackmail potential to get a coalition agreement that inflated his power and his political party's power in the government, but that did not reflect of how strong his support actually was. And that, if you will, already wrote instability into the DNA of the new government. So I will stop right there, maybe just leaving with the remaining 10 seconds that I hope out of this current debate in Israel, while many people are calling for a new constitution, I hope that if there will be a constitution emerging out of this current crisis, I hope it will be better thought of than the coalition agreement of the 35th government was. More about that later if there is any interest. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you so much, Saba, and all the other speakers. Thank you so much. This was truly insightful. I learned a lot. I have a bunch of questions. I wrote them here. I will communicate with you independently later on, but I want to open the floor for Q&A. And this is the stage where, we can all have our voice in this conversation. So you can either raise your virtual hand and I'll try to accommodate that, or you can write your question in the chat box underneath. I see that somebody raised the issue of we could get a written summary of each speaker's presentation. I think there's a summary or actually an extension of that in the collected volume. I will try to link the book from Amazon so we can get the authors can make some shekels out of it one way or another. I see that Shibli Telhami is first. Shibli, go ahead. Just don't forget to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Shibli.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I think it was an excellent set of presentations. I thought it was really high quality, and looking at it from through the eyes of political scientists, I thought they were really very good and very good to the point. So congratulations on the book. So I look forward to reading it in detail. I just want to ask you a question about the polarization, the main theme, and I am not sure what polarization about. What is we could talk about in America, we talk about partisan divide, we could talk about value divide. In Israel, what are the dimensions of that polarization? I'd like to get a little bit more into that in terms of even the language of right left doesn't make sense anymore, right? So what is, and obviously the crisis that emerged over the past five elections had not been along traditional what we think of polarization, and often the polarization isn't even ideological. It used to be how much compromise you're going to make on the Palestine question or on the West Bank, and obviously it's become something else. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the dimensions of this polarization. What are the most important? Has the measures of what we call polarization shifted over time, which is something I've been thinking about of late?
Thank you so much, Shibli. This is an excellent question. It's my number one question on my list. Let's see if we can collect one or two more questions. Let me check the chat box. Okay, I don't know. Okay, thank you so much for the comment. Okay, more questions before I can include the others. All righty, Shibli wins. So, folks, how do you define polarization? How do you operationalize that? And again, being a political scientist like Shibli, and Shibli does polling, is this a quantitative indicator or is it a qualitative indicator? How do you measure? How do you define? How do you establish whether it exists or does not? Who's going to go first? You can raise your hand, either virtual or in your face kind of a thing. I can see you. I think that Eli's, thank you so much. He's a good student. And then I have Saba. Excellent. Eli, go ahead. Saba is next.
Okay. Professor Telhami, thank you for your very important question. And this is really a tricky issue. And I don't think I have I can only express my opinion of this because there are several ways it could go. I'll just recall at the beginning, I mentioned a certain definition of polarization, which defines the normal multiplicity of differences in a society, increasingly aligning along a single dimension and individuals increasingly perceiving society as us versus them. And I think this is really appropriate for the current Israeli situation, because the issues have definitely changed. And who would have thought that like the judicial issue has become such a clear divide between what is perceived as right and, I don't know if left necessarily, but maybe soft right, center, and left, or something like this. And I think the reason that, and this was never in the past, the original judicial revolution, as it's called, was during a right-wing government, right? In the Shamir government. And I think that the reason that it's so malleable is to a certain extent that this is very much an identity issue. The issue of polarization, and its identity issue in terms of the self-perception of elites versus the people, or maybe periphery, or whatever you want to call those who don't think of themselves as elites, and whatever the issue may be that can fit into that divide. And this also, sort of fits into the issue of, like Paul said, the sort of a perception of Judaism as well in terms of its role in state issues, and to a certain extent, the current debate is based on this idea that the high courts and the values the values of equality, the basic laws, and the idea of overturning the ability of the court to overturn the will of the people, sort of works on this issue of this identity conflict of the people versus the elites, and that's in a way what's playing out as I see it currently.
Well,
so
if I may follow up, I mean, I get that up to a point. I mean, obviously we have a polarization in the U.S. and it's been a problem, and we're all trying to figure out how to measure it. As I said, it's not even really partisan, although there's overlap with partisan. Just like in Israel, it is up to a point, coinciding with what traditionally we thought of as right and left center. But in the U.S., the underlying principle is probably race, is probably increasing assertiveness of white men because they feel that they're losing. It's not generational. It's not elites versus non-elites so much, because in some states you wouldn't even find that divide at all. And so we have, like, there is something that is more about race that Trump tapped into, and that's why you have, like, the white supremacists being mobilized and become a core, and he can't let go of them. And that's the polarization. There's, as I said, there's a little bit of overlap with Republicans, but it's not perfect because a lot of them have abandoned it. Now in Israel, when I'm looking at the polarization,
I'm going to interrupt, but if you have a question, that'd be a nice.
Sure.
Otherwise, let me please move to the next.
Sure.
Next
So
speaker,
just
please.
a question then. I mean, is it really is it really right and left, or is it really more about something else that's taken place, like secular religious, for example? I mean, that's another divide that could be more interesting.
It seems to me that Shibli is kind of hinting, perhaps more profoundly, that there's multiple vectors of this polarization. It's not a catch-all phrase. It's not just one-size-fits-all kind of a thing. Saba, go ahead. You were next. And then we have Malba Maziad, our esteemed colleague. Yeah. Saba, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, Shibli. So when I look at polarization, when I think of polarization, I think about the direction that competition amongst the organized political parties in the party system takes place. So if that direction goes far away from the center, if the differences are becoming more marked and more different, if the stretch of the space that the partisan differences and the electoral differences take up gets wider, then that's a process of centrifugality and polarization. Obviously, conversely, if differences are minimized, if the organized partisan forces come and are bunching together closer towards the center, which is relative, it doesn't have to be the fixed ideological center. It can of course move relative to each context and society. That's the opposite process. What I think is very interesting in Israel is, and I go back to the comparison between the two contexts that I wrote about in the volume, is that the differences were truly ideological, or the divisions really were truly ideological between Alignment and Likud back in the 1980s. And that was good in a way, because when you have, even if you have polarization amongst ideology, there is always a possibility of compromise, because you can turn the heat up, you can move a little bit more to the center or to the left or away from whichever position, but you can move. Now, the problem with the this hermeneutic herestatic invention of the pro-anti-Netanyahu cleavage that started in 2019 is that you can't compromise on that. You're either for, you either work with him, or you do not. And if you compromise on this, like once you put yourself in one camp and you start changing, then you pay the price that Gantz did. And the same thing is happening with judicial reform. Now, Gantz is really the only one that's trying to make it into a variable. But the other forces, like neither the coalition is not looking at judicial reform as a variable, and the opposition is not looking at, except for Gantz, as a variable. And that's tough, because now you have cleavages along which movement is very, very difficult because it's categorical. It's not interval.
Thank you so much, Saba. I see that Marwa raised her hand, our esteemed colleague as well. I have a sense that she would like to ask Zaki Shalom a question, but I might be wrong. Marwa, go ahead. The floor is yours, my friend.
Sorry, just before Marwa asks, hi Marwa. I do have like something to highlight really quickly, and I think, I mean, I didn't think about the issue in general because I only wrote that chapter of the book, and I only just read the other chapters. But I think in the context of the Arab/Palestinian community in Israel, the polarization is about tactics. So everyone is not going to tell you that, oh, I don't want a Palestinian state. That's not the issue. It's about tactics of engagement with the state. So I think that's another interesting layer to look at the polarization within the Arab/Palestinian community. But I'm going to put it out there.
Okay. Actually, I want to raise maybe an observation about Anwar's categorization of external elements versus at the institutional domestic level or the community level, and pair that with actually Paul's explanation of going back to the 80s. I think Israel is often not compared enough to the regional dynamics and other regional countries. And I know Paul did mention, I'm very glad actually he did, like Israel is not such a case that is so unique. You can look at other cases. I think when you trace the origin of the religious turn or the Jewish identity or the kind of tension between secularism and religiosity and all of that, I think you'll find that this is the story of Turkey. This is the story of Egypt itself. This is the story of Anwar's categorization of these external forces with how the use of the Muslim Brotherhood in response to decades of progressive socialism under Nasser, etc. So I think actually in my own writing now, I'm writing something about how Israel more or less has been mirroring and a mirror image of trends that are happening specifically actually about Egypt. You think of Ben Gurion and Nasser, and then by the time you have Sadat and Begin, they were almost responding to similar legacies and similar things, and that's actually how they even converged on this religious synthesis, which by the way is a borrowed term from Turkey's Muslim kind of nationalist synthesis. So I would just invite more, the comparativist in me, is comparative politics in me, is inviting even more unusual, perhaps that should be usual, comparisons between Israel and other regional dynamics to which it found itself responding. And you have a character like Ben Gvir today in response, I think, to even very religious jihadist sensibilities, the holiness of the land and the claim of this is the same vocabulary that is always circulating anyway. So it's just interesting to have this dimension be added. That's all, but very intellectually stimulating, and thank you very much for the rich contributions.
Thank you, Marwa, for this insight. I think that Anwar is pretty much a comparativist, nevertheless, and I think that there's something to it to try and see what the other examples might kind of say and shed light on with regards to Ram. Thera Buras, our very own PhD candidate. Good to see you with connections to Shibli, the Gildenhorn Institute, currently in the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken. Go ahead there.
Hi, Eli, and good afternoon. And thank you all for this very, very interesting debate. I just honestly have a million things going through my head because I'm actually, as we speak, writing on a topic that interconnects into all of this. And so I have a large question and a few observations, and I want to kind of push a little bit more on what Dr. Shibli has also asked. But my question here, maybe the elephant in the room, so to speak, is there's a general perception, at least, and whether this perception is right or wrong, that's a whole different question. But there's a general perception in Israel that the Palestinian issue is no longer an issue, that at least it's not one of the main challenges immediately facing Israel, definitely not in the way that it did in the 2000s or in the 1990s, and so on. And in your opinions, to what extent is this polarization a result of that general belief that the Palestinian issue is no longer a central challenge to the state of Israel. Meaning in the past, there was this divide, and Dr. Shibli also mentioned this, that being leftist means you're pro-compromise, you're right-wing means you're not for compromise, at least not through the Oslo channel and whatnot. And since that issue is no longer there, then the whole political system moved into this new paradigm of whatever it is, right? It's secular, religious, et cetera, et cetera. So is this polarization, which is almost entirely on domestic issues, is it, in your opinion, a result of this this fact that the Palestinian issue no longer plays a central role in national Israeli psyche? That's my question. I have also a few observations or a few points that I just want us to take into consideration that make me think about how deep this divide is, because sometimes it doesn't correspond to logic. So just for one example, Netanyahu lost the premiership following the 2021 election, even though Netanyahu himself probably could make the argument that his two major accomplishments as prime minister happened in the 6 months prior to him losing his premiership. So in August of 2020, he got the Abraham Accords achieved along with Donald Trump, which for him was a major success. And obviously in the first 3 months of 2021, there was this, COVID response. Israel became the first country in the world that was fully immunized with COVID shots. And yet these two massive achievements from Netanyahu's perspective did not lead to him winning, basically, or passing that 61 threshold. So even when you have policy successes, that does not translate into electoral successes. So that's just one issue I was thinking about. The other issue is, and here I'm pushing maybe a little bit more into what Dr. Talhami was talking about, and that is, how would you explain in basic terms how two people that are on the right of Netanyahu, Avigdor Lieberman and Gideon Sa'ar, both agreed to go in and leave their camp and join a coalition with the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel? This is where the whole left-right no longer makes sense. There's obviously something deeper than that. But how would you explain it? Okay, so it's polarization, but what kind of polarization would lead someone like Gideon Sa'ar? And in in Lieberman's case, it's easy to make the secular religious divide, right? Because he represents a cleavage that's probably the most secular cleavage in Israel. That's the Israelis of Soviet descent. But in Gideon Sa'ar's case, he's always presented this traditionalist face, right? He was the person, after all, as interior minister who had the Chok HaMarkolim, right? Which was the law that prevents most kiosks in the secular city of Tel Aviv from functioning on Saturdays. So what makes him move as well? So it's polarization, but what kind of polarization exactly? Thank you.
Thank you so much there. And I see that Paul is eager to answer the question, I think, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, given the fact that he's teaching a class on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Thayer, for joining us and your questions. I think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or more properly, the future of the West Bank and Gaza, is underlying the demonstrations, even if there has been a tacit or not so tacit agreement not to bring it up. I think the whole issue of a greater Israel, which means a religious and religious Zionist Israel, is what's underlying it, and that provides an identitarian framework for Jewish citizens of Israel to be on one side or another. The Palestinian issue can't go away permanently as long as there's an occupation. And I think we see see it coming back in through Joe Biden's Saudi Israel détente or normalization. Just a brief response to, I think, your last question about why Bibi's successes in the Abraham Accords and COVID didn't give him anything, precisely because the country is so polarized that whatever he does, positively or to some degree negatively, these sides are set. So it doesn't so much matter what you do, it matters who you are and how people perceive you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Saba is next. And I would just add, I think that Israeli politics has become increasingly personalized. It's about the personality, something that perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu himself brought in from the US in the mid-1990s, right? The Camelot model, so to speak. His wife, the kids, the young, the fresh, the crisp, as opposed to Shimon Peres in the famous debate on camera. Saba, your call.
Thank you so much, Eli, and thank you for those questions, Tahir. Just very, very quickly, I wanted to reflect or respond to two of the questions you posed. One about the Palestinian issue. I agree with Paul that it cannot go away, but how it stays and how it continues to be relevant for the political debates and for the political process in Israel, I think can change and does change. And it does change, I think, in as a function of how Israel and the region, the broader region, manage their relations. So if the Palestinian issue will become, and right now that's how I see the Israeli strategic thinking about it, to be the outcome of an outside-in process. Like, let's normalize with as great a part of the Arab Middle East as possible, and then out of that, an agreement with the Palestinians will emerge. Then that's very different compared to the Rabin thinking about, no, we have to fix this. And then as a result, and it's not just the Rabin thinking, that was also, of course, 2 decades ago, very much the Saudi and the Arab thinking also, that this is the Palestinian issue needs to be resolved first, and then there will be a possibility for normalization. So I think that matters. But right now, I think the process is just very different, and the outside in is what I see definitely being the name of the game. When it comes to the other question about how can we explain Lieberman, the phenomenon of Lieberman, Saar, and the likes going into a coalition with Ra'am and deserting their ideological brethren, I think there are 2 very important points to address that we have not. And I think we should remember that while polarization, which is about values, is important, there are 2 important processes that are also taking place in the political system, 2 important changes. One of them is demographic and the other one is generational. Demographically speaking, Israel has shifted to the right. It's not borne out by the current constitution of the coalition, but if you look at, if you sum up the total number of votes that were cast for ideologically right-wing parties, it's an unbeatable bloc. It is very much beatable today because it's divided, and that's where my other point is about generational divide. There's very much a competition for leadership for that bloc, and this is at the root cause. This is not the only cause, but this is very much at the root of understanding the invention or the herestatic creation of the anti-Netanyahu cleavage. Gideon Saar wants to lead this broad Israeli right, no less than Yvette Lieberman or Bibi Netanyahu. If they can't do that from within, they will try to get it from the outside. I'm not saying this is the only reading of it, but this is one reading of it, of the situation that's borne out by the data. So be that as it may, I would just like to say, Tahir, that demographic and generational changes, I think we should be aware of when it comes to, and not just values, when we talk about polarization. And last but not least, but I stop there because Ellie wants to.
Alrighty, so we're out of time. We actually exceeded the time allocated to us, and some people must leave. I'm going to give Ellie 1 minute to say kind of concluding remarks if he wants, and Michal as well if she wants. I don't see her. I don't see Michal. No, I don't see Michal. Alrighty. Oh, there you are. My apologies. I wasn't looking in the right place. Alrighty, Ellie, 30 seconds. If Michal is talking too, the two of you is a minute. Go for it.
Michal asked me to take care of it. I'll just very briefly just to address Tahir's comment with the Palestinian issue. The previous government, and we wrote this in our introduction to the book, the Bennett-Lapid government really tried to ignore the Palestinian issue as a way of having this very heterogeneous government, and it didn't work because the final nail in the coffin of that government was this emergency regulations, which deals specifically with the status of the settlements and so forth. And the current government is really trying to change the rules of the game. This is part of the judicial overhaul. And even though the protest movement is not putting this at the forefront for various reasons, there's a very strong voice within the protest movement called the Hagush Neged HaKibush, right? The block against the occupation, which says very clearly there's no democracy with an occupation. And it's a very vocal and important aspect of the protest, even if it's not at the center. So it's not going away, it's there. Very briefly to summarize, so just to connect this to the current situation, the legal overhaul that has been dominating the public agenda for the last number of months and has given birth to this very well-organized protest movement is a symptom of a much deeper fracture in society. The consensual concept of what it means to be Israeli, in our view, doesn't really exist anymore. The melting pot model is no longer relevant. Society's become much more multicultural, much less cohesive, while media has changed incredibly, creating these echo chambers, both in social media and legacy media, where each group becomes very entrenched in its own narrative. As we quote in the title of our book, the Yeats quote, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. I regret to say that the concept of Israel as a Jewish democratic state is no longer really relevant for creating a consensus. It has become an empty slogan. Each side has a very different definition of what it means to be a Jewish state. One side saying it's a secular state with a Jewish majority, while the other saying that the principles of Orthodox Judaism should determine policy. And each side has a very different definition of what a democratic state means. Could mean a state with strong democratic institutions and separation of powers, or it could mean a state based purely on the will of majority rule. If we are honest with ourselves, when the state of Israel is viewed as equivalent to the greater land of Israel, a goal which the current government is trying to advance, it is very difficult to really claim that we are in fact a Jewish state or a democratic state. So I would like to say that the concepts of melting pot, of Jewish democratic state, are no longer the basis for building consensus. There is a need for a new social contract that will allow different groups in society to feel that they are equal citizens whose identities are respected and protected. At the same time, no single group would be victorious, and no group would live in a state that reflects their own vision. One of the reasons for the growing polarization is the way that we perceive debate and conflict. In politics, in media, even in interpersonal conversations, we tend to see debate as a violent battle, what we call in both Hebrew and Arabic, well, it's an Arabic word, but Hebrew stole it, I suppose, what we call kasach, a term that is defined by ethnographer Tamar Katriel as this violent confrontation, a zero-sum game in which the victory of one side is based on the loss of the other. And in the current state of polarization, if one side is indeed victorious over the other, it is inevitably everybody's loss. Therefore, in building a new social contract, I would argue that it is necessary to adopt some of the concepts of deliberative democracy, to engage in real listening to people we disagree with, without engaging in delegitimization of opposing views, to understand the values that underpin the various approaches, and to try to draw a social contract according to central values upon which consensus could be constructed. And I will end with that. Thank you for giving me
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eli, for your contribution. Like the other editors and contribute, those people who spoke, who asked questions, who wrote about it, who will talk about that from now on. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. You're free to go. You may go. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a beautiful day. And this is us clapping, both in the room behind me, Max, and others elsewhere. I see that Efrat is clapping too. Avis is clapping too. Thank you so much, folks. Cheers.
Thank you, Eli.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.